In the last section, we got our Redis setup all working, and we're definitely serving data from cache now. However, there's definitely a couple of really big issues that we have with our current setup. So I'm going to point out probably 2 or 3 things that definitely need to change in our current setup. After we understand these problems, we'll then start to refactor all this stuff into a much more maintainable and really cool looking fashion. Okay, so I'm going to first change on over to my browser again. And now I'm going to go through the process of creating a brand new blog post. Okay, I'm going to make a new blog post, a second one. So I'm going to first just copy my lorem ipsum text here really quick. I'm then going to create a new blog post by clicking on that red button down there that you saw just a second ago. I'll put in my second blog post as the title and my lorem ipsum text as the content. I'll click on next, I'll save it, and I think that's good. Okay, so I just created another blog post, and hey, as a user, I definitely would expect to now see that blog post in this list right here. So let me go ahead and refresh the page and see that second post appear. So I'm going to refresh, and hey, wait a minute. No matter how many times I refresh the page, I do not see that second blog post appear. Well, you know what? I think that's probably not that much of a surprise. Remember what we've said so far. We have said very clearly, anytime we try to make a query, we first check to see our cache and see if this query has already been resolved and stored inside of our cache. And that has definitely happened so far. We have said that for this particular user, go get their list of blog posts, store it inside of Redis, and that's it. We have implemented absolutely no logic whatsoever to ever somehow reach back out to Mongo and update that query. We're not trying to update it in any way, shape, or form, which is clearly not ideal. Now there's 2 other things I want to mention. That right there is a big problem, obviously, and we'll figure out how to fix that, but there's 2 other things I want to mention about our current setup. Okay, so the next thing I want to mention is the one that's kind of obvious. Looking at this request handler, we've got a tremendous amount of logic inside of here, all dedicated to just caching our data, right? We got this if statement, we got these alternate res.send functions. This request handler went from being 2 lines of code to being I don't know, maybe about 20 lines, maybe 25 lines of code, something like that. So clearly our current setup for handling all this caching logic, even if it worked the way we expected, does not really fit well into our existing code base. Without a doubt, I do not want to eventually have a bunch of request handlers that have a bunch of logic to try to look up the client key, the cache key, and then say, hey, do we have anything? Well, then return that. And then otherwise, do the query and store it inside of Mongo or Redis and all this stuff. So right now we've got so much extra baggage or extra logic inside of this one request handler. And there's no way I would ever consider it acceptable to copy paste all that code into every handler inside of my project. So without a doubt, we need to think of a way that dramatically makes this code, all this caching stuff, far more reusable than it is right now. So that's the second big thing that I think we need to be aware of. Now the third thing that we need to kind of think about a little bit and try to figure out how to fix is that right now our caching key is based on our user ID, right? That's what we've been saying. We've been saying that every single time that someone makes a request, where is it right here? Every time someone makes a query, we're going to store the result inside of Redis where the key is the user's ID and then the value is a list of blog posts. So what would happen if we introduced a second resource into our application that we wanted to cache? What would happen if we also had a list of tweets or pictures or anything else? Would we still use only the user ID for that resource as well? Because then sometimes when we looked up a key, it might return a list of blogs, and then other times it might return a list of tweets or images or whatever else. So I think that above everything else, we also have to consider the fact that right now our caching setup is really only good for one singular resource, which is definitely also not very acceptable. So I think we've got a couple of problems cut out for us. We've got some code or the fact that none of our values inside of our cache expire. That's problem 1. We have a bunch of code that is not at all reusable. That's number 2. And number 3, our caching keys right here are probably going to get clobbered all the time whenever we start introducing new resources into our application besides just blog posts. So that's 3 big things we have to fix. So let's take a pause right here. We're going to continue in the next video, and we're going to start to refactor our setup, all this caching logic, into a much more reusable, correct, basically just better. Let's leave it at that. It's going to be better. So let's pause here, take care of that in the next video.